He thought he was about to catch a thief, but before the night was over, Vincent Castellano would discover something that money had never taught him. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below, and if you believe dignity matters more than status, make sure to like and subscribe. Now, back to Vincent Castellano. The mansion was silent at 11:47 p.m. The last guests had left nearly 2 hours earlier, and the echoes of laughter, crystal glasses, and polite conversations had long faded into the cold Chicago night. Only the soft hum of the industrial refrigerators remained, hidden somewhere beyond the endless marble hallways and polished wooden doors. Vincent Castellano preferred the silence. Most people assumed a man like him enjoyed attention, luxury, and constant company. The truth was simpler. Silence was the only thing in his world that couldn't be bought, negotiated, or demanded. He loosened the collar of his white dress shirt as he walked toward the kitchen. His black jacket rested over one shoulder, and exhaustion sat heavily behind his blue eyes. The evening's charity gala had raised millions of dollars. Reporters had praised him. Business leaders had shaken his hand. Politicians had smiled for photographs. Yet somehow, all he could think about was how much food had been left behind. Entire trays of untouched steak, roasted vegetables, fresh bread, expensive desserts that cost more than some people spend on groceries in a month. Waste bothered him. Always had. The kitchen lights were mostly off when he arrived. Only a single lamp above the prep station cast a warm glow across the room. Stainless steel counters reflected the light like silver mirrors. Vincent reached for a bottle of water from the refrigerator and paused. A faint sound drifted through the silence. Not conversation. Not footsteps. Something softer. The rustle of plastic. He frowned. Every member of the staff should have gone home by now except overnight security. Setting the bottle down, Vincent quietly followed the sound toward the rear pantry. The door stood slightly open. A narrow line of light spilled onto the floor. He stepped closer. Then he stopped. Inside, hidden between shelves stacked with canned goods and bulk supplies, sat Naomi Carter. The young Black Maid looked so startled and vulnerable that for a brief moment Vincent almost thought she might cry. She sat on an overturned milk crate, still wearing her housekeeping uniform. Her dark curls were pulled back beneath a simple headband, and exhaustion lined her face. In her hands was a disposable plate holding leftover pieces of chicken, a dinner roll, and a spoonful of vegetables. Food from the gala. Food that should have been discarded hours ago. Vincent's first thought was immediate. She was breaking the rules. Staff members were not allowed to take food without permission. The policy had existed for years, long before he purchased the estate. Yet something stopped him from speaking. Naomi wasn't eating the way a hungry person usually ate. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't sneaking bites out of fear of being caught. Instead, she carefully separated every item into portions. One small piece for herself. Another piece placed into an old plastic container beside her. Then another. And another. 3 containers in total sat on the floor next to her feet. Her movements were slow and deliberate, almost ceremonial. Vincent remained motionless outside the doorway. Naomi lifted a small bite of food toward her mouth, then suddenly lowered it again. Her shoulders trembled. She looked away and wiped at her eyes. The room became painfully quiet. Vincent felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. People cried in his presence all the time. Employees worried about losing jobs. Competitors feared losing contracts. Clients feared losing money. But this was different. There was no audience here. No performance. No manipulation. Just a tired young woman sitting alone in a pantry after midnight, trying not to let herself cry. Naomi took a deep breath and forced a small smile. Then she picked up one of the plastic containers and gently closed the lid. The expression on her face wasn't relief. It wasn't satisfaction. It was gratitude. As if something as simple as leftover food felt like a blessing she couldn't afford to take for granted. Vincent's gaze moved too. Her worn shoes. The faded seams on her uniform. The frayed strap on the old canvas bag resting beside her. Details he had never noticed before. Details nobody noticed when a person spent every day making sure other people were comfortable. Naomi looked down at the remaining food on the plate and whispered something too quietly for him to hear. Then she carefully folded a paper napkin around the last dinner roll and placed it into the final container. Her hands moved with the precision of someone protecting treasure. Vincent suddenly realized he wasn't looking at theft. He was looking at survival. And for reasons he couldn't yet explain, that realization unsettled him far more than any broken rule ever could. The mansion remained silent around them. Naomi still had no idea she was being watched. And Vincent Castellano, a man who believed he understood everything happening under his own roof, was beginning to suspect he had missed something important all along. Vincent remained hidden in the shadow of the pantry doorway long after Naomi sealed the last container. He expected her to stand and hurry away, but instead she carefully stacked the containers inside her worn canvas bag and checked each lid twice. The attention she gave those leftovers was the same attention most people reserved for valuables. When she finally rose to her feet, she stretched her back and winced slightly. It was the movement of someone who had spent an entire day working without complaint. Vincent stepped back before she could notice him. A moment later, Naomi slipped out of the pantry and disappeared down the service hallway. The mansion returned to silence, but Vincent did not move. His eyes drifted to the nearly empty plate she had left behind. There was still food on it. Not much, but enough to make one thing clear. She had packed more for someone else than she had kept for herself. That detail stayed with him as he returned upstairs. At midnight, while most of Chicago slept, Vincent sat alone in his study staring through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. A glass of water sat untouched beside him. His thoughts kept returning to the pantry, to Naomi's trembling shoulders, to the tears she thought nobody could see. He opened her employee file on his computer. Naomi Carter, 29 years old, employed for 11 months. Perfect attendance record. No disciplinary reports. No complaints. No requests for salary advances. No requests for emergency assistance. Nothing unusual at all. Yet something felt wrong. Most employees who struggled financially eventually asked for help. Naomi never had. Vincent reviewed her payroll records. The numbers surprised him. Nearly every paycheck was transferred out within 24 hours of being deposited. Month after month. Almost the entire amount. Very little remained. He leaned back in his chair. Where was the money going? The next morning, the mansion came alive before sunrise. Housekeepers moved through hallways. Kitchen staff prepared breakfast. Gardeners arrived through the rear entrance. Vincent usually paid little attention to the rhythm of household operations, but today his eyes searched for one person. He spotted Naomi carrying fresh linens across the second-floor corridor. She greeted another employee with a polite smile before continuing on her way. Nothing about her appearance suggested what he had witnessed the night before. She looked composed, professional, invisible. It occurred to Vincent that invisibility might be exactly how she survived. Later that afternoon, he noticed her again in the dining room. A group of event planners had arrived to discuss an upcoming fundraiser. While they sampled imported pastries and discussed decorations, Naomi quietly cleared dishes from a nearby table. One of the planners barely acknowledged her presence as she walked past. Another handed her a napkin without making eye contact. Naomi accepted it with the same calm expression she wore for everyone. Vincent watched the interaction unfold. Nobody was cruel. Nobody raised their voice. Yet somehow it felt worse. It was the kind of disregard that reduced a person to background scenery. For the first time, Vincent wondered how many times she had walked through a room and been completely unseen. Across the dining room, Naomi carefully gathered the remaining pastries after the meeting. Ended. For a brief second, her gaze lingered on the untouched food. Then she looked away and continued working. Vincent noticed everything. And the more he noticed, the more convinced he became that the story he had seen in the pantry was only the beginning. That evening, Vincent made a decision he rarely made. Instead of relying on reports, assistants, or managers, he wanted answers for himself. From the second-floor balcony overlooking the service entrance, he watched the staff clock out one by one. The autumn air carried a chill across the estate grounds, and the golden lights of the mansion reflected against the polished stone driveway. At exactly 9:12 p.m., Naomi emerged carrying the same faded canvas bag. She walked alone toward the city bus stop nearly half a mile from the property. Vincent remained still for several seconds before quietly heading toward his car. He told himself he was simply verifying a suspicion. Nothing more. 20 minutes later, he found himself following the bus from a discreet distance through neighborhoods far removed from the luxury surrounding his estate. The skyscrapers faded. The expensive storefronts disappeared. Eventually, the bus stopped near an older section of the city where aging brick buildings stood shoulder to shoulder beneath flickering streetlights. Naomi stepped off and began walking. Vincent parked farther down the block and watched from across the street. She entered a small grocery store. Through the front window, he saw her carefully comparing prices. Not casually, not like someone choosing between brands, like someone calculating every dollar. She picked up a loaf of discounted bread, a carton of eggs, a gallon of milk. Then she returned one item to the shelf and stood silently for several moments before selecting a cheaper alternative. Vincent frowned. He had negotiated contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Yet somehow watching Naomi choose between a few dollars of groceries felt heavier than any business decision he had faced all year. When she left the store, she continued walking another 6 blocks before reaching a modest apartment building. The structure was old but clean. The paint had faded. Several windows needed repair. Nothing about it suggested comfort. Naomi disappeared inside, carrying her groceries and the canvas bag. Vincent remained parked across the street longer than he intended. Then he noticed something. A woman in her 60s appeared at one of the second-floor windows. Her movements were slow, careful. She looked tired. A moment later, Naomi joined her. Even from a distance, Vincent could see the younger woman helping her sit down before drawing the curtains closed. His attention sharpened. Back at the mansion, he opened Naomi's employment records again. This time he searched deeper. Emergency contact. Angela Carter. Mother. Same address. Additional records revealed medical insurance claims filed over the past year. Kidney treatments. Prescription costs. Specialist visits. Vincent stared at the screen. Suddenly, the missing money made sense. The transfers. The sacrifice. The exhaustion hidden behind polite smiles. Naomi was not supporting only herself. She was carrying an entire household on one income. Yet, even that did not explain the containers of leftovers. Not completely. Shortly after midnight, another notification caught his attention. Tuition payments. Community college. Recipient, Marcus Carter. Relationship, brother. Vincent leaned back slowly. The room fell silent around him. Every paycheck, every extra shift, every skipped meal, every hidden container of food. Naomi had been stretching one salary across 3 lives. For the first time, Vincent began to understand why gratitude had filled her eyes when she packed those leftovers. They were never meant for her alone. The discovery should have satisfied Vincent's curiosity. It should have given him a complete explanation for everything he had seen. Instead, it raised a new question. If Naomi was struggling so much, why had she divided the leftovers into 3 separate containers? Her mother could explain one. Her brother could explain another. But not all of them. The answer arrived 3 nights later. A charity banquet had filled the mansion once again with wealthy guests, polished speeches, and enough food to feed dozens of families. Shortly before midnight, Vincent noticed Naomi quietly collecting untouched portions after the event ended. Nothing unusual about that. Staff often cleaned the leftovers before disposal. What caught his attention was the familiar canvas bag waiting near the service exit. An hour later, Naomi left the estate carrying it. Vincent followed once more. This time she did not head toward her apartment. She boarded a late bus traveling south through neighborhoods most of the city's elite never visited. Rain tapped softly against the windows as the bus rolled through dark streets lined with aging storefronts and vacant lots. Naomi exited near an industrial district and continued on foot. Vincent parked several blocks away and followed from a distance. The neighborhood grew quieter with every block. Eventually, Naomi reached an area beneath an elevated railway bridge. The concrete supports cast long shadows beneath the yellow glow of streetlights. Vincent slowed as he watched her approach a cluster of old storage units and temporary shelters assembled from donated materials. Then he heard it. Laughter. Children's laughter. Naomi smiled before she even reached them. The transformation was immediate. The tired housekeeper who spent her days blending into the background suddenly seemed brighter, lighter, almost radiant. 4 children spotted her first. They rushed toward her with excited voices. A little girl wearing an oversized jacket threw her arms around Naomi's waist. A boy who could not have been older than 10 grinned when he saw the canvas bag. Naomi knelt beside them and began handing out the carefully packed containers. Vincent remained frozen across the street. One child thanked her before opening the lid. Another carefully split a dinner roll in half to share with a younger boy. Nobody grabbed. Nobody fought. They treated the food as something precious. Naomi sat with them on a weathered bench and listened as they talked about school, homework, and ordinary childhood concerns. She laughed when one of them proudly showed a spelling test with a high grade. She listened when another described an upcoming basketball game. For nearly 40 minutes, she gave them something far more valuable than leftovers. She gave them attention, belonging, care. Then an older volunteer approached carrying blankets. Naomi quietly handed over several grocery store receipts and a small envelope. The volunteer looked surprised. Even from a distance, Vincent could tell money was inside. His stomach tightened. Naomi was already supporting her mother, paying for her brother's education, skipping meals herself, and somehow she was still helping these children. The rain continued to fall softly as Vincent watched the scene unfold. For the first time in years, a simple question entered his mind. How many extraordinary people walked through his mansion every day while everyone around them remained too busy to notice? Vincent did not sleep that night. Long after he returned to the mansion, the images remained vivid in his mind. The children beneath the bridge, the carefully packed containers, the way Naomi had smiled when she handed over food she could barely afford to spare. By sunrise, curiosity had transformed into something deeper. He needed to understand why. A week later, the answer arrived unexpectedly. While reviewing archived employee paperwork, Vincent noticed an old volunteer reference attached to Naomi's application. The organization no longer existed, but one phone call led to another. By noon, he found himself speaking with a retired social worker named Helen Brooks. There was a long silence on the line when he mentioned Naomi's name. Then Helen laughed softly. That girl never changes. Vincent listened. 20 years earlier, Naomi had not been the woman quietly cleaning hallways inside a mansion. She had been a frightened child sleeping in temporary shelters after a series of family hardships left her mother struggling to keep a roof over their heads. There were weeks when food came from donations. Weeks when uncertainty followed every sunset. Helen described a little girl who shared everything she received. If another child had no coat, Naomi offered hers. If another child was hungry, Naomi split her meal in half. Most children focus on surviving, Helen said. Naomi focused on making sure nobody survived alone. After the call ended, Vincent sat quietly behind his desk. Suddenly the pieces fit together. Naomi was not helping those children because she felt sorry for them. She was helping them because she remembered being one of them. That evening, Vincent observed her differently. He watched as she carried fresh flowers into the dining room and carefully arranged them before guests arrived. He noticed how she greeted elderly staff members by name, how she always paused to help others even when her own workload was heavier than anyone realized. Nobody seemed to notice. Kindness had become so natural to her that people treated it like part of the furniture. Later that afternoon, a new housekeeper accidentally dropped a tray of glassware. The crash echoed through the corridor. Several employees turned toward the noise with frustration. The young woman looked horrified. Before anyone else reacted, Naomi knelt beside her. "Are you okay?" she asked. Not a single word about the broken glasses. Not a complaint. Not criticism. Concern came first. The young employee nodded, visibly relieved. Vincent watched from the far end of the hallway. Most people revealed their character when life was easy. Naomi revealed hers when someone else made a mistake. That night, as another gala prepared to fill the mansion with wealthy donors and influential guests, Vincent found himself thinking about a simple truth. Every person in attendance would be recognized for success. Some would receive awards. Others would give speeches. Yet none of them had spent the past year quietly feeding hungry children while supporting a sick mother and helping a younger brother chase a better future. The realization settled heavily in his chest. Naomi Carter carried more dignity than many people who walked through his front doors wearing designer suits. And soon, whether she wanted attention or not, that truth was about to become impossible for others to ignore. The opportunity arrived sooner than Vincent expected. 2 days later, preparations for another high-profile event filled the mansion with controlled chaos. Florists moved through hallways carrying arrangements worth thousands of dollars. Catering staff unloaded specialty ingredients. Event coordinators reviewed schedules with clipboards in hand. Amid all the activity, Nobody noticed that several trays of premium desserts had gone missing from the kitchen inventory. Nobody except Harold Bennett, the estate's senior operations manager. Harold prided himself on order. Every item had a place. Every employee had rules. By late afternoon, his irritation had grown into suspicion. He reviewed inventory sheets twice before summoning kitchen supervisors. Voices began to rise behind closed doors. Employees exchanged nervous glances. By 6 o'clock, Harold was convinced someone had been taking food. The announcement spread quickly through the service wing. Staff members gathered near the preparation area while Harold questioned employees one by one. Vincent happened to be reviewing event details nearby when he heard the commotion. He stepped into the corridor just as Harold opened a storage cabinet. Inside sat several containers. Simple plastic containers. The same kind Vincent had seen before. The room became silent. Naomi stood frozen near the doorway. Her face immediately lost color. Harold lifted one of the containers. "Would anyone like to explain this?" he asked sharply. Nobody answered. Several employees shifted uncomfortably. Others looked away. Naomi stared at the floor. Harold's eyes settled on her. "These belong to you, do they not?" The question hung in the air. Naomi hesitated for only a moment. "Yes, sir," she answered quietly. Harold nodded as though he had just confirmed a theory. "Then perhaps you would like to explain why estate property has been leaving this kitchen without authorization." The words struck harder than they should have. Not because they were shouted, because they were spoken in front of everyone. Naomi swallowed. "I never intended any harm. That was not my question." Harold's tone remained cold. "Did you remove food from this property?" Naomi lowered her eyes. "Yes." A murmur spread through the room. Vincent watched from the back without speaking. Several employees exchanged disappointed looks. Others appeared relieved that suspicion had landed on someone else. Nobody asked why. Nobody asked where the food had gone. The conclusion seemed obvious to them. Harold folded his arms. "Company policy is clear. Unauthorized removal of food is grounds for immediate termination." Naomi's shoulders stiffened. For a brief moment, Vincent thought she might defend herself. Explain everything. Tell them about her mother, her brother, the children beneath the bridge. Instead, she simply nodded. The reaction stunned him more than any argument could have. She was willing to accept humiliation rather than expose the people she was helping. Harold reached for a disciplinary form resting on the counter. "Sign this and collect your final paycheck tomorrow." The room remained painfully still. Naomi looked at the paper. Then she looked around the kitchen, at the co-workers she had helped, the people she greeted every morning, the hallway she had quietly cared for during nearly a year of service. Her eyes glistened, but she refused to let tears fall. Slowly, she reached for the pen, and at that exact moment, a calm voice broke the silence. "Put the form down." Every head in the room turned toward Vincent Castellano. No one moved. Harold's hand froze above the disciplinary form. The kitchen, which moments earlier had been filled with quiet judgment and uncomfortable whispers, became so silent that the hum of the refrigerators sounded deafening. Vincent stepped forward slowly. His expression revealed nothing, but his presence alone changed the atmosphere of the room. Employees straightened instinctively. Harold cleared his throat. "Mr. Castellano, I was simply enforcing policy." Vincent glanced at the form on the counter before looking toward Naomi. She still held the pen in her hand. Her eyes remained lowered. "Were you?" Vincent asked calmly. Harold nodded. "Food was removed from the property without authorization." Vincent folded his hands behind his back. "And before deciding to terminate an employee with an exemplary record, did anyone ask where the food went?" Harold hesitated. The question seemed to catch him off guard. "The violation itself is the issue." Vincent's gaze hardened slightly. "That was not my question." The room fell silent again. Nobody answered. Vincent looked around at the gathered staff. Some avoided eye contact. Others stared at the floor. "Interesting," he said quietly. "A room full of people willing to assume the worst without asking a single question." Naomi finally looked up. Confusion flickered across her face. She clearly did not understand what was happening. Vincent turned toward her. "How long have you worked here?" 11 months, sir." "In those 11 months, have you ever received a disciplinary warning?" "No, sir." "Have you ever been late?" "No, sir." "Have you ever refused a task?" "No, sir." Each answer seemed to make Harold more uncomfortable. Vincent nodded. "Then perhaps there is more to this story than a plastic container." Naomi lowered her gaze again. Mr. Castellano, please. It is all right. I broke the rules. Several employees appeared surprised by her response. Even now she was protecting everyone except herself. Vincent studied her for a long moment. Then he made a decision. The disciplinary action is suspended. Harold blinked. Suspended. Until all the facts are known. Vincent's voice remained calm, but there was finality in it. Nobody argued. Nobody dared. Naomi looked genuinely shocked. Sir, I do not want special treatment. The statement caused several employees to exchange glances. Most people in trouble begged for exceptions. Naomi was trying to refuse one. Vincent noticed that too. Good, he replied. Because this is not special treatment. It is fairness. The words settled heavily over the room. Fairness. Such a simple concept. Yet somehow it felt revolutionary. Harold slowly lowered the form. The accusation that had seemed so certain minutes earlier suddenly looked incomplete. Vincent turned toward the gathered staff. The event begins in 2 hours. Everyone has work to do. The crowd dispersed almost immediately. Conversations remained hushed. Curious glances followed Naomi as people returned to their duties. Within minutes, only Vincent, Naomi, and Harold remained. Harold quietly excused himself and left. Naomi stood alone beside the counter. Her hands trembled slightly. Vincent noticed. You were willing to lose your job. Naomi stared at the floor. Some things matter more than keeping a job. Vincent felt something shift inside him. Most people spent their lives protecting themselves. Naomi had spent hers protecting others. For the first time since discovering her secret, he realized the truth was larger than he imagined. And before the night was over, everyone in the mansion was about to learn it. The ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers as guests filled the mansion once again. Business executives, charity board members, public officials, and community leaders mingled beneath golden light while a string quartet played softly near the grand staircase. Everything appeared perfect, yet Vincent's attention remained fixed on a single person standing quietly near the service entrance. Naomi had returned to work after changing into a fresh uniform. She moved through the crowd carrying trays and refilling glasses as though nothing unusual had happened. As though she had not nearly lost her job only hours earlier. As though she had not spent the past year carrying burdens few people in the room could imagine. The contrast unsettled him. Around him stood people celebrated for wealth, influence, and success. Yet the person he respected most that evening was the woman nobody seemed to notice. An hour into the event, Vincent stepped onto the stage. The room gradually quieted. Conversations faded. Hundreds of eyes turned toward him. Most expected another fundraising announcement. Others anticipated a speech about community investment. Nobody expected what came next. Vincent thanked the guests for attending before pausing. His gaze moved across the room until it settled on Naomi. Tonight, he said calmly, I would like to recognize someone whose contribution has never appeared in a financial report. Confused expressions spread throughout the audience. Naomi froze where she stood. Vincent continued. Many people believe generosity begins when you have excess. They believe kindness is easy when resources are abundant. But the greatest acts of character often come from people who have the least to spare. The room grew still. Several guests exchanged puzzled glances. Naomi looked as though she wished she could disappear. Vincent then shared a story. Not every detail. Not enough to embarrass her, but enough. He spoke about a woman who worked long hours while supporting a sick parent. A woman helping a younger sibling pursue an education. A woman who quietly spent her evenings caring for children most of society had forgotten. As realization slowly spread across the ballroom, heads began turning toward Naomi. Shock replaced confusion. Vincent noticed several staff members staring in disbelief. Harold stood near the back of the room, his expression unreadable. A few hours ago, Vincent said, some people were prepared to judge this person without asking a single question. They saw a rule. They never looked for the reason behind it. Silence settled over the ballroom. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. For perhaps the first time all evening, titles and status no longer mattered. Vincent stepped away from the podium and extended his hand toward Naomi. Miss Carter, would you please join me? Her eyes widened. Every instinct told her to refuse attention. Yet after a long moment, she slowly approached the stage. The walk seemed to last forever. When she finally stood beside him, the room remained completely silent. Vincent looked toward the audience. Some people inherit influence. Some earn it through business. But true leadership is measured by how much good a person does when nobody is watching. Naomi lowered her eyes as emotion filled them. Around the ballroom, guests who had barely noticed her earlier now saw her differently. Not as staff, not as background, but as someone whose quiet dignity had accomplished more than many public displays of generosity ever could. For several seconds, nobody applauded. Nobody spoke. The silence itself became the loudest sound in the ballroom. Then, slowly, one person began clapping. Another followed. Then another. Within moments, the entire room rose to its feet. The standing ovation seemed to catch Naomi completely off guard. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked across a crowd that only hours earlier would have walked past her without a second glance. Some guests wiped tears from their eyes. Others lowered their heads, suddenly aware of how easily they had measured worth by appearances. Vincent waited until the applause faded before speaking again. There is one more thing. The room grew quiet. Naomi looked at him with confusion. Vincent smiled faintly. It was a rare expression, one that surprised even people who had known him for years. Over the past several weeks, I have learned something important. Problems become permanent when good people are left to solve them alone. He gestured toward a large screen behind the stage. An image appeared. It showed an abandoned community center several blocks from the railway bridge, where Naomi spent her evenings helping children. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Vincent continued. Earlier this week, that property was purchased and fully renovated. A second image appeared. Fresh paint, new classrooms, a modern kitchen, study areas, recreational spaces. The transformation was remarkable. Naomi stared at the screen, unable to understand what she was seeing. Then a final image appeared. Above the entrance of the renovated building hung a simple sign. Naomi House Community Center. The room erupted once again. Naomi covered her mouth as tears finally escaped. For the first time all evening, she seemed completely speechless. Vincent allowed the moment to settle before continuing. Beginning next month, the center will provide meals, tutoring programs, after-school activities, and family support services. And it will do so under the leadership of the person who inspired it. Naomi looked at him in disbelief. "Sir," she whispered. Vincent shook his head gently. "You have already been doing this work without resources. Imagine what you can accomplish with support." The applause returned, louder than before. Weeks later, the center opened its doors. Children filled the classrooms. Volunteers arrived from across the city. Local businesses donated supplies. Teachers offered their time. Families found help they never thought possible. Naomi walked through the building each morning with the same humility she had carried into the mansion, but now she no longer carried the burden alone. Her mother received improved medical care. Marcus completed his education and accepted a position as a teacher. The children beneath the bridge found a place where they were safe, valued, and encouraged to dream bigger than their circumstances. One afternoon, nearly a year later, Vincent visited the center without announcing his arrival. Through a classroom window, he saw Naomi helping a young girl with homework while several children laughed nearby. The building buzzed with life. Hope seemed to live in every corner. Naomi looked up and noticed him standing outside. She smiled. Not the grateful smile of someone receiving charity, but the confident smile of someone who finally understood her own value. Vincent smiled back. Then he quietly stepped away, content to remain in the background. The center did not exist because of his money. It existed because one woman had refused to stop caring when nobody was watching. And that day, the city remembered something that wealth alone could never buy. Dignity belongs to every human being, and sometimes the people the world overlooks are the very ones holding it together.